May I have your attention, please? Good evening.
You're listening to Straight Talk with Dean and Mark. We thank you for tuning in and hope you enjoy another exciting episode of our show.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another episode of Straight Talk with Dean and Mark. Man, it is hot outside. Well, it's not that bad this week, man. You know, a couple of days ago when a tornado touched down in Jersey, but right now it's like 84 degrees up here. It feels a little bit like 86. But in most recent news, man, a Florida man, Paul Hoskins, gets 8 months in prison. He's the first January 6th defendant sentenced on a felony charge, all right? Now, Florida man became the first felon sentenced Monday for his role in the January 6th insurrection at the U.S. Capitol, receiving 8 months in prison, being ordered to pay $2,000 in restitution for a portion of the damage to the building. Hoskins, who is 38 years old, of Tampa, Florida, faced sentencing guidelines of 15 to 21 months in prison after pleading guilty to obstruction of an official proceeding for interrupting Congress's counting of Electoral College votes. He spent 15 minutes in the Senate chamber holding a flag supporting former President Donald Trump and taking pictures. District Judge Randolph Moss called literally waving the flag for Trump an unmistakable sign of loyalty to a single person rather than the country and democracy. Now, although Mr. Hoskins was only one member of a larger mob, he actively and intentionally participated in an event that threatened not only the security of the Capitol, but democracy itself, Moss said. That is chilling for many reasons. Now, Hoskins had asked Moss for no prison time. Yeah, right. Hoskins said he had no plans to enter the Capitol when he traveled to Washington to attend Trump's rally early in the day, but he got swept up in the march along Pennsylvania Avenue. Once inside the Capitol, he said he apologized to police officers for the trouble and he offered medical care to an injured rioter. I can say without a shadow of a doubt that I'm truly remorseful and regretful for my actions in Washington, Hoskins told the court. This was a foolish decision on my part, and I take full responsibility for it. Now, Moss said he grappled with sentencing Hoskins for his personal behavior rather than the more violent or destructive rioters around him. But Moss also called the riot more than a First Amendment protest because it forced the evacuation of the House and Senate chambers under threats against House Speaker Nancy Pelosi and Vice President Mike Pence. He understood what he was doing, Moss said. He was one of the small number of people who made their way to the Senate floor. Now, Moss said he weighed the seriousness of the charge among extremely damaging events that day against Hoskins' individual behavior. Hoskins had no criminal background. He didn't engage in violence or destroy property, and he was among the first to offer to plead guilty after cooperating with investigators. Hoskins also said he voluntarily performed 100 hours of community service at an animal shelter after he was arrested. That's like so the ass was scared to go to prison. It's essential to send a message that this type of conduct is utterly unacceptable and that grave damage was done to our country that day, Moss said. At the same time, I do not believe that Mr. Hoskins, other than having made some very bad decisions that day and done some really bad things that day that did some real damage to the country, that he is a threat or that he is inherently an evil person. Now, D.C. judges imposed sentences shorter than guidelines in 38.9% of cases in 2020, according to the U.S. Sentencing Commission. Mona Setke, an assistant U.S. attorney, had recommended an 18-month sentence to promote respect for the law and to deter a future riot at the Capitol. The details of that day were quite harrowing, Setke said. He was part of that mob. Setke acknowledged that Hoskins wasn't violent or destructive himself, but he witnessed officers being injured and rioters spraying chemicals. She said he came ready for conflict with goggles and gloves and benefited from the violence of others. He was among about 50 people who made it into the Senate chamber, she said. At its core, this was a grave danger to our democracy, Secchi added. January 6th was an act of domestic terrorism. Patrick LeDuc, a defense lawyer for Hoskins, disputed calling the riot domestic terrorism and said it was a protest that led to a riot. But Moss said rioters interrupted one of the most solemn functions of democracy, counting votes for the peaceful transfer of power. That is not an exercise of First Amendment rights by any measure, Moss said. Now, Hoskins is among the first dozen defendants to reach plea bargains with prosecutors, 4 for felonies and 8 for misdemeanors. 2 defendants with misdemeanors have been sentenced, 1 to 6 months behind bars, and 1 to 3 years of probation. At least 535 people were charged in the first 6 months after the attack, with 165 accused of assaulting, resisting, or impeding officers, according to the Justice Department. More than 50 people are charged with using a deadly or dangerous weapon or causing serious bodily injury to an officer, the department said. Now, about 140 police officers were injured during the melee that temporarily halted Congress counting electoral college votes. The disruption led to charges of obstruction of an official proceeding, which carries a 20-year maximum sentence. Now, dozens of conspiracy charges were based on planning for the attack through encrypted messages, military-style training, and wearing helmets and reinforced vests. Hoskins told investigators that while walking through the Capitol, he saw other people breaking windows and engaging in a knife fight, and others who were injured, but that he didn't participate in that conduct according to charging documents. Our position is that his role will be defined as minimal, LeDuc said. If you participated in the insurrection on January the 6th, you need to get that same type of sentencing that folks get when they get caught with crack cocaine, when they get caught when they assault someone. You just need to go ahead. You did the crime. Now, who cares if you did that community service at an animal shelter? That sounds all nice and everything because you realize somewhere along the line that you effed up. And the sentencing needs to be harsher because you need to send a message that this type of silliness, absence of thought, or whatever you want to call it, should not be tolerated on American soil. And short of execution, you deserve lengthy sentences. You don't get to say, oh, I made a mistake. You'll be mistaken for someone with some sense when you're serving that time. That's just my thought on it. But anyway, it's the Six-Man Dean Geronimo. I'm in the studio from NJ to NC with my right-hand man, Mark Lee. So, Mark, tell me what's good in your neck of the woods, my brother. Hello, Mark, you there? It looks like he hadn't gotten to the stage just yet. So I found something, though, y'all. And this isn't stuff that, for us in the United States, it's one of those things where, you know what, you can't really believe. It's one of those, I can't believe they wrote this. But in a series of unfortunate events, a groom married the sister of his bride after she collapsed and died earlier in the wedding ceremony. Now, the incident happened in Uttar Pradesh, India, when a woman named Sarabi and a man named Mangesh Kumar were tying the knot in a Hindu ceremony on May 27th, reported by the Times of India. Now, during the Jamala, the exchanging of garlands by the bride and groom in an Indian wedding, Sarabi collapsed, and the doctor was called to treat her after she suffered a heart attack. After the doctor pronounced the bride dead, the families of the bride and groom agreed the bride's younger sister, Nisha, will wed the groom. Now, in India, the majority of marriages are arranged, probably about an estimated 90%. Narada Patel, founder of South Asian matchmaking site Single to Shadi, said it's likely the families arranged for the sister to marry the groom because they wanted to keep it in the family. Patel said her mother was in a similar situation when her aunt died in childbirth, and there was an idea for her mother to marry her brother-in-law. So much vetting goes into matching families and marriages, and it's natural for the families to want to stay together, Patel said. Her mother was unmarried and young, but her parents accepted her denial of the idea. In the case of the Utah Pratesh wedding, the family decided to go ahead with the ceremony while Sarabi's body actually laid in another room. It was a bizarre situation as the wedding of my younger sister took place while the dead body of my other sister was lying in another room. Sarab, who is Sarabi's brother, told the Times of India. You know, we have never witnessed such mixed emotions, Sarabi's uncle Ajab Singh told News 18. The grief over her death and the happiness of the wedding has yet to sink in. Boy, that's like flipping a switch real quick. Well, she's dead. You know what? Your turn. Next up. I don't know how that works. We wouldn't do too well over here in the United States. That would end up in a Royal Rumble or something like that, I guess. But, hey, Mark, you there yet, brother? He hadn't made it onto the stage yet. So what we're going to do is we're going to move into one more article I found, man. And it says, Biden walks back claim that Facebook is killing people. Now, in an about face on his own condemnation of social media misinformation about COVID-19, President Biden on Monday said Facebook isn't killing people by hosting false claims. Biden softened his stance after company executives pushed back on his Friday statement that Facebook is responsible for deaths caused by anti-vaccine sentiment. Asked by a reporter on COVID misinformation, what is your message to platforms like Facebook, Biden lashed out Friday. They're killing people, Biden responded. The only pandemic we have is among the unvaccinated, and they're killing people. But asked about those comments on Monday, he instead told reporters that he had just read an article claiming that most COVID-19 misinformation comes from 12 people, apparently referring to a report by the Center for Countering Digital Hate that identified Robert F. Kennedy Jr. as the most famous member of the disinformation dozen. I mean precisely what I said, Biden said Monday before contradicting his prior remark, holding Facebook responsible for deaths. I had just read that on Facebook, it was pointed out to Facebook of all the misinformation, 60% of the misinformation came from 12 individuals. That's what the article said, Biden said. Facebook isn't killing people. These 12 people who are out there giving misinformation, anyone listening to it is getting hurt, is killing people. It's bad information. Then Biden added, my hope is that Facebook, instead of taking it personally, that somehow, I'm saying Facebook is killing people, as they would do something about the misinformation, the outrageous misinformation about the vaccine. That's what I meant. Biden also touted the stock market's successful year, despite the fact that on Monday morning, the Dow Jones Industrial Average fell by about 900 points amid fear that vaccines may not head off the more contagious Delta variant of COVID-19 that is tearing through the UK and largely unvaccinated areas of Missouri and Kansas. Now, Biden's dust-up with Facebook came as the White House pressed social media companies to do more than censor anti-vaccine posts. More than 68% of U.S. adults have had at least one COVID-19 dose, and dramatically lowering infections in most parts of the country, for some reason, have notably lower vaccination rates. So, you know what? Get the vaccine, y'all, because looks like the Delta variant is attacking the folks that have actually not been vaccinated. So I'm going to try this one more time. Mark Lee, are you in the house, my brother?
I'm in the house. I was actually, it happens, it helps or it hurts when you are multitasking, and it wasn't even the live stream multitasking, but as I was in the call and involved with you, I had a call from WCOM, the radio station I'm involved with, and the current DJ on the air was like, my music isn't playing. Why isn't my music playing? And I'm going like, is the power on? And they're like, I think it is, and apparently the power is on, but I referred them to the engineer, and hopefully the engineer will help them fix their problem, because they were calling me going like, Mark, what's going on? And I'm like, I'm here, and I'm doing my show. I don't know what's going on. You got to tell me what's going on. So we were having a going on moment and all of that. So we were trying to figure out what was going on. But like I said, I am in the process of texting them, and hopefully they will solve the problem. Because, that's what happens when you create what amounts to a mini media empire. So, between you and me working together, we're trying to create a mini media empire. So I've got radio, I've got live streams, I've got podcasting, and I know you've got a variety of things helping us on our end. So we're just trying to create a mini media empire so that eventually they can say the name Dean Geronimo and Mark Lee and speak it in the same sentence as Ted Koppel.
Hey, that'll be cool. You know what I mean? And that'll be awesome, man. How's the weather down there?
That would be rainy. How is the weather there? Because it has been rainy as all get out over here.
Well, you know what? We had the rain this weekend, and actually, I was leaving a function, and it was like the gates of ocean opened up, and it was just coming down. Come to find out, we probably were riding through what was then reported the next day as a tornado having touched down, not too far from where the main, the highway is. So luckily we made it home, you know what I mean? But I was like, dang, we missed that, or we probably drove through it. And,
wow.
Luckily, by the grace of God, that nobody was hurt. And even with the tornado touching down, it didn't hit anyone's houses. A couple of cars got jacked up where it did touch down, but, fallen trees and beat up cars, houses were basically spared. So that's always a good thing. It's a bad thing, but it's a good thing as well. You can't stop Mother Nature, but at least there were no houses or people that were injured. Car, you can get another one of those. So,
I saw this hilarious story. I think you'll get a kick out of it. I heard some of your news stories, but I think you'll get a kick out of this. I've been following news, following YouTube, and things of that nature. And you need to check this out. There was a woman recently, I think it was a week or two ago, but she took the law in her own hand. I know you as somebody in criminal justice would argue people not to do this on a regular basis, but apparently some young thug stole her Mercedes-Benz.
Yes,
so using social media, she tracked the person down and tracked him down to a barbershop. So I'm sure you've seen the video and heard the story, but tracked him down to a barbershop.
Yeah, she ran up on him, man. Like, that's a Detroit girl. She just wasn't playing, you know what I mean?
She would not play it, and she dragged the brother. I mean, she didn't just wait for the cops. She dragged the brother away from the thing. His homeboy decided he was going to get some twists. And I know whether it's a woman or a male, twists do not take a short amount of time. So he was getting his hairs all twisted and everything, and she grabbed him, raised and them twists, and dragged the brother. I saw the video, and I'm going like, oh, boy. I mean, you work in the system. How you going to explain that in the system while you waiting for your court date? Because it's all over the video, including the prison internet.
It's all in the news.
It's all over the prison internet, too.
Bruh. Like, on that one right there, shout out to Bianca Chambers. That's her name. And she said, yo, I'm going to get my car, and I'm snatching this dude, and I'm snatching him bald head and dragged him right on down the thing. So, you know what? Hey, man. Sometimes you get what you get. That's what you get for stealing stuff. I guess you won't try that again. You know what I mean?
No, but I want to know from the prison standpoint, how is he going to cope with that when he goes into the system? Because he got to go into the system, even if you got to wait for his trial and everything. So I want to know how you going to explain that.
I don't know how he's going to explain it, but I know from the opposite end, it'll be like, hey, aren't you the dude that just got snatched out of the barbershop? I mean, it's one of those things. We need to know now. We need to know, make sure we got the right person right here. Please tell me you're not that dude that stole the woman's car and she came and got it back. Is the top of your head hurt? Oh, we're going to make a joke out of it. I'm sorry, but I'm not sorry. We're going to have fun with that one.
Yeah, we're going to have fun. So I know I invited some people to... Oh, I was going to say, I invited some people. I was wondering if anybody was there.
Yeah, we got somebody here, man. We're about to find out who this is right now. Let's see if we can bring them in. Thanks for calling Straight Talk with Dean and Mark. You are now on the line. Tell us who you are and where you're calling from.
Good evening, Dean and Mark. It's George from Boston.
Hey, how you doing?
Hey, George from
Doing
Boston,
good,
what you
guys.
got going on? Tell us a little bit about what's happening in your life and what's going on in your world. We love hearing from our folks in the Northeast. You know, Dean's up there in New Jersey, and I'm down here way in North Kakalaki, North Carolina, as we like to call it if we're going to be official. But definitely, I know that we
North
reach out to
Oh, pretty good. Well, thank you both for having me on. I'll go with your lead, Dean. I feel like I'm kind of in hostile territory here, but we'll see what happens here. First, I want to say that January 6th was an American Reichstag moment, and I think a broader theme that comes across from that is information and misinformation. I think that carries over from the events of January 6th to misinformation, information about COVID-19. And the question that you really got to ask is who benefits from the negative value of misinformation? I think that's a fascinating question. You all caught me today coming out of a U.S. court hearing with a federal judge on the issue of COVID-19 vaccines, and it's an issue that I've been litigating, and I'd be happy to clear up any misinformation that might be out there.
So what do you think are some of the misconceptions that people have about COVID-19? I know a lot of people are still wondering about whether they should get their vaccinations. I know that I think Dean has told me that he is fully vaccinated. I think that I'm maybe a shot away from being fully, but I'm definitely in that category and everything. But definitely I was just wondering, what are some of the misconceptions that you feel that people have about the vaccinations and just about COVID in general? Because we do know that we're in the middle of a pandemic, and some people are saying that there are spikes. And I know that even the school systems are wondering, because here in North Carolina, our year-round schools started today. I want to say that they do not have to have a mask on, but I need to double-check that. But I do know that they're also having free lunch for everybody as well. So that's some of the things that are going on. But my guess is that the traditional schools, which my nephews, I think, are part of, I don't think that they're year-round, if my memory is serving me correctly, but they will probably go in August. But I know definitely some of my friends will be going in August, and the year-round may be tests for the traditional. But I was just wondering, what are some of the misconceptions in your mind that exist out there?
Well, firstly, I'm glad to hear that we have the full spectrum of unvaccinated. So I myself am unvaccinated, from unvaccinated to half vaccinated to fully vaccinated on this call. So that's good. That's good to know. The first thing I guess I'd like to start with, I'm looking at 5 documents that I'm sitting with in front of me here now. But the first thing to start with is whether it's even appropriate to call the COVID-19 mRNA and adenovirus vector injections vaccines, because frankly they don't meet the standards of what we would traditionally call a vaccine. It's a brand new technology. It's using mRNA, which tells your body to create these spike proteins, which are frankly a toxin. So they are the pathogenic material that causes the SARS-CoV-2 infection. And so I guess the place to start would be to call them what they are, which is that they're not vaccines, that they are mRNA injections. And I've got the documents to back that up. So to start, we could look even as far back as the early 2000s when the United States government patented the severe acute respiratory syndrome, and then continued on to patent a human isolate of coronavirus built on top of SARS. So that's when we talk about COVID-19, we're really talking about SARS-CoV-2, which is the second iteration of the human occurring severe acute respiratory syndrome coronavirus. And this is patented technology that is held by the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services and the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill. So, I mean, if we're talking about information and misinformation, that's the place to start. There's a debate going on now about whether or not the coronavirus, COVID-19, came out of a lab in Wuhan or whether it was naturally occurring. And the reason why there's been so much tension around that is when you start to peel back the onion, it gets rotten pretty quick, and it goes all the way back to us.
When you say us, you mean America? Or because I know that even in the African American community, there was some concern around early tests, meaning Tulsa, Oklahoma, and some of the other things. I mean, Tuskegee, and some of the early experiments that took place in that regard. And then, of course, I've even heard some people speculating that the vaccine may actually be putting nanotechnology in our body to actually track us and things of that nature. I'm not saying that I necessarily buy that, but I have heard that argument given and everything. But I was just wondering your thoughts about the relationship to some of the early tests like Tuskegee, which of course dealt with syphilis, and of course some of the other conversations that had taken place as well.
Yes, of course. The Tuskegee experiment is a stain on United States history for sure, because as you know, the Black Americans were targeted with syphilis, and then the government refused to provide a cure for them. So they were experiments, but upon without their informed consent. So it's a heavy stain on our history, to be sure. And I'm glad you brought up the analogy, because the same is happening on a massive scale nationally and internationally. The mRNA injections, the univirus injections, are authorized only for emergency use. And depending on where you are in the country, for example, if you're in Massachusetts, Governor Baker pronounced an end to the COVID-19 emergency over a month ago. So the institutions that are out here trying to force and coerce students to be vaccinated prior to returning to campus are operating in a model that fails to provide students with informed consent, first, of the fact that these injections are emergency use authorized, and second, that there's no longer an emergency in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts.
So in your mind, where would be the time that we should be doing these kind of things, or should we have never gotten involved in this in the first place? And I know that there's even been arguments around masks, and I know that we've even had this conversation here, because I know that whether I've gone to stores or Dean has gone to stores, some people want to wear the mask, some people don't want to wear the mask. So whether we're talking about the vaccine, the other thing that I think that people oftentimes think about in terms of the pandemic is freedom of speech when it comes to the mask. So I'd love to hear your thoughts about that as well.
So first of all, I have to caveat what I'm saying, because I'm actually a contract employee with the Executive Office of Health and Human Services here in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. So what I say doesn't necessarily reflect the views of EOHHS or the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. But to put things into perspective, back in 1976, there was a rampant flu called the ANJ76 flu. It's called the New Jersey flu. And the government went through a similar process of attempting to mass vaccinate individuals within the United States. And what occurred as a consequence of that was a spike in the prevalence of Guillain-Barré syndrome. It's something that occurred 10 times the background rate of Guillain-Barré syndrome within the population, and they attributed this to the mass vaccination policy. And in that year, as a result of the study that came out, concerning Jean-Barré, the mass vaccination program was ended. So to put that in contrast with another paper that was published by a group called Wallace, Clement, and Akima, it was titled "The Safety of COVID-19 Vaccinations, We Should Rethink the Policy." And it's escaping me which journal this was published in, but I think it's the MDPI, where the conclusion from studies of European and Israeli data of mass vaccination using mRNA injections was that for every 3 deaths that vaccines prevent, we would have to accept 2 deaths from the mass vaccination. So, I'm not a mathematician, but if you do some basic math of accepting that, let's just accept that the government figure of 600,000 deaths from COVID is accurate, and to put that in context of that 95% of those deaths occurred with 2.5 comorbidities, we're talking about 30,000 deaths that resulted from COVID alone. And if you look at systems available, there's actually some debate apparently at the CDC about whether or not what system to use as a system of record, whether that should be something called vSafe or the vaccine adverse effect reporting system. But if you look at the vaccine adverse effect reporting system, as of last month, there were roughly 10,000 deaths reported to that system. And there were some other studies produced by Harvard Pilgrim Health that indicated that less than 1% of adverse effects from vaccines are ever reported into the system. So you could do some math and extrapolate how bad things might be. But when you look at history and you look at the types of regimes that engaged in censorship in the past, and I'm thinking of Nazi Germany, Soviet Russia, and the communist Chinese regimes, that they were never really on the right side of history when it came down to it. So again, I guess this kind of gets back to the question of information versus misinformation. And in the hearing that I had today, I found myself arguing with the senior judge without the defense really even lifting a voice or saying a word in the hearing. So I think we're living in very, very perilous times, gentlemen. Particularly when you have academic and scientific dissent being censored. We really got to think about, what side of this do we want to be on? Do we want to be on the side of the censor, or do we want to be on the side of scientific debate and discussion?
And you had actually raised the whole question about what happened on January 6th and a couple of other things, but I was just wondering, in your perception, how do you feel media in general is doing, and in particular social media? Because I've heard some people talk about that they feel that certain social media sites are part of the cancel culture society, but then I've also heard some people that feel that their voices aren't necessarily being heard or heard accurately. And I could even make the argument that some people may say that from the left with some people's perceptions of critical race theory. But I just want to know your perception of how the media is doing both in the social media and also in the mainstream media.
Well, me personally, I'm getting off of social media. I don't think it serves any purpose. I think that anybody that wants to have a conversation with me to find out how I'm doing, my phone number is up on the internet. They know how to get to my website. But as far as what they're doing, and on any given day, I feel like people like Zuckerberg are serving whichever master suits them to keep their business alive. I don't think that these people have any sense of morals or ethics. I think when you look at Zuckerberg flying the American flag on a electric surfboard on the 4th of July is an affront to our democracy, particularly when he's the biggest censor. I mean, speaking from experience, I experienced cancel culture 7 years ago before it was recognized as a thing, and I think more and more. I think it's acceptable. It's becoming acceptable for people on the left to talk about cancel culture as a real thing, because it's starting to eat up moderate leftists.
Gotcha. So definitely, and it sounds like that's been going on for a while, that a lot of people have been wondering about counterculture, and some people would argue that there was even some counterculture activities going on from the government side against the left. I could argue that maybe there was countercultural things taking place against the Black Panthers and the Weather Report, or the Weather Underground, I should say. But definitely, I was just wondering, do you think that it is a thing that is on one side or the other, or is it, my assessment, the more accurate one, which is something that is impacting both sides? And some people would say that those are opposite, that those are extremes, because, some people would say that, like, say, the Proud Boys are the extreme on the right and BLM is the extreme on the left. I'm not saying that I necessarily buy that, but some people would make that argument, and some people would also say that we need to read their manifestos and what they are actually asking for. But I would also argue that there are probably, just like any other organization, different factions. So I don't know that I'm going to buy just the quote-unquote official manifestos, but I was just wondering your thoughts about that.
Well, I'm sorry, I don't mean to interrupt you. But
no, you're good.
Okay. Well, I haven't read any of the manifestos, so I don't know. But I don't think that censorship is a left or right issue. I think it's an up and down kind of issue. I think that white power and black power need to get together and fight the power.
Interesting concept. Dean, you could actually argue that sometimes happens in our prison system, because you work in the prison system, and I know that there are some people from both sides in the prison system, but I'd love to hear your thoughts about what our guest is saying and everything as I bring you into the conversation as well.
I think he said it all. Black power and white power need to get together to fight it, because if not, it becomes a game of tug of war. It's a back and forth, and it is wasted time. Like, there's so many other things that we can do, and I've said it before, that we could do to better make a better life for our people in this country. Good people are good people regardless of where they come from, background, financial status, and all of that stuff. We put all of those things to the side and realize that people are people. Some people may need more help than others, and we can get somewhere. In the prison system, I'm out of uniform, so I'm on the side of what can we do to get you ready now, so that when you leave this place, you made a mistake and you're here. All right, what's next? I'm not here to browbeat you, ridicule, or anything like that. Now, what is the plan so that when you walk out of those doors, you don't come back? I'm always going to have somebody there. I'm not going to run out of tenants, if you will, but don't become a repeat customer. You know what I mean? So now what are you going to do while you're here, by way of getting your education, by way of programming, by way of thinking differently than you did, which led you to where we are now? It's time to do something different. If you do what you always did, you get what you always got. And
definitely,
and now my job is to say, you know what, there is a different way. You weren't afraid to try that way. Don't be afraid to try this way. If we can agree that you're at the lowest point that you can ever be, don't be afraid to try, because there's no way you can fall off of the floor. So just changing the mindset, changing the way, people have turned so many things into a huge back and forth, and there's really no real right or wrong in some of those situations. Being vaccinated is one of them. It's like all right, well, they said according to what the vaccine, those that haven't been vaccinated are now showing signs of being attacked by this Delta variant. But let's go all the way back. Who let the virus out? Because to me, they just don't materialize out of anywhere. If that's the case, then we would have a virus every year, bigger than the flu. You know what I mean? So now I'm like, all right, y'all's little science experiment failed miserably, but nobody wants to own up to it.
I mean, that's what some people say happened with AIDS.
I honestly, and you know what, the older I get and the more you look at stuff and they say, you know what, maybe it had a different name before, but no, not really, because people were not just dropping like flies, man. You know, like people were just dying at the beginning of the pandemic, like every day. There's so many people passed away. And it's like, if you remember that movie Outbreak, that's what it reminded me of. Like, all of a sudden, people just started getting sick. And it was droves of people. It wasn't like one or two people, a person here, a person there. It was people everywhere. And it did not discriminate. So it didn't say, like some people try to, oh, it's only this region, or it's only this race, or it's only, man, that virus was taking out everybody. Like, if I can catch you, you're gone. So now we got to start thinking, everything isn't a battle. Some people may want it to be that way, but it's not. And when good people get together to fight all of the silliness, maybe we'll start changing some stuff around.
No, that makes a lot of sense. I think. Now I was going to ask George, what are some of your thoughts? The other thing that I've heard people talk about, and I want to get your reflections on this, is the stimulus has gone out there, and people that are getting money and have been receiving money, and of course some people, there's been a big petition for us to get a fourth stimulus, and I'm not going to lie, I could actually use that money and everything, but there is that push, but then there are folks that are like, there's a lot of restaurants and businesses that are shutting down early or not even opening because they can't get enough staff, because people are feeling that staying at home is enough of that they can make as much money staying at home and they're safer. So they are probably buying into what's going on with some of the thoughts around the pandemic, but definitely they are using the stimulus money as day-to-day survival. And I know just here, I went to some restaurant and they had closed a little bit early because they had a big sign, we're short on staff. So definitely that is going on, and not just here in North Carolina, but throughout the country. And I know that's even some of the summer jobs like swimming pools and beaches and things of that nature. But I was just wondering your thoughts about the impact of some of the economic decisions that have been made by both the current president and the past president.
Well, Mark, I'm not an economist, but thanks for that, Dean. It's great to hear that kind of refrain. So I can speak to that from a personal level.
Right.
I know that, and Dean, I have some experience with the criminal justice system, and what it took for me getting out of that was a spiritual awakening. So in that process, I've become more right-minded, in the sense that I believe the path to prosperity comes through responsibility.
True.
And the longer that the government decides to come to us with a handout, and the more that people decide to accept that handout. It was Reagan that said that if the government told you that they were there to help, that you got to run the other way. And unfortunately, in this generation, it's become more acceptable to accept that loaf of bread from the government. And I feel like people are becoming more and more dependent on that. When if you go for a year and a half without working, and the government tells you that it's okay to do that and that you should be afraid to go outside, it keeps you from developing as a person. And that touches on all levels of our society.
Very true.
From economics to school to human relationships and family relationships. So I'm of the mind that people need to get back to work. And, you know, I think that it might be a little less than what the government might be giving you, but I think what you'll find is in doing that work and putting in the sweat that people will find a sense of dignity again. And I think that's more important than any amount of money you might be making in a paycheck.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I actually had that conversation about education with the founders of another network that I'm involved with, which is now called Pod TV. It used to be called, well, it's still called International Broadcast Media as well. But both of the founders have talked about the fact that they feel that the education system is stuck in the 18th century, even though we're in the 21st century. And they really wish our schools would teach more about financial literacy and about some of the things that we need on a regular basis. But I was just wondering, is that kind of where you are with education, that you wish that we would actually have a more reflection about true values that can help people on a day-to-day basis?
Yes, absolutely. I think financial literacy is a huge part of that. The importance of saving, you know, just because the government's giving you a stimulus doesn't mean you need to go. That means that things are bad and that you probably should save that money. I think more broadly we need a metamorphosis of the college campus as well, because as you know, we have the one of our biggest bubbles is the student debt bubble. I don't think that anybody really knows how to deal with that in a way that is equitable and revolutionary. I mean, we the college system, at least the higher education system, has been working off this idea of a credit hour for many years. I don't know how far back it goes, but at least 100 years. I want to throw that out there. That basically your degree, your whatever it is that the institution says that you're competent in, is based off of how many hours your butt was in a chair and if you got C's or not. And I think that with just because there's frankly no better way for them to track it up until very recently, where we've had this innovation of digital badging and verified credentialing, which is actually a company that I started 7 years ago. It's a company called MetaCampus that actually. So there's been some funny things in my life that intertwined where I was trying to raise money for that business, ended up getting arrested and having the whole system come down on me. So yeah, I mean, we need a metamorphosis in our college campus. The way that we first of all what we teach, the way that we track how students are learning, and then ultimately the values that are imbued in that. Because I feel like at least over the last 60 years, the college environment has swung very far to the left.
Well, definitely. I hear you and everything. So what are some of the ways that you would like the education system to be changed if you could just like have a magic wand and change the education system?
If I had a magic wand, I'd implement a system of massively open online administration. The number one cost, when you look at all of the costs associated with higher education, the number one rising cost over the last 30 or 40 years has been the cost of administration and the role of the college administrator on campus as sort of a bureaucratic role that is quasi-state, in that at least the public institutions perform the role of the training facilities that ultimately will lead to gainful employment. And there's been a growth in the ranks of the bureaucracy of those institutions, and ultimately they're an offshoot of state government. things would be. And so in order to combat that, I would implement a system of massively open online administration and get rid of all those administrators. And what that means is, so I should probably explain. So I don't know how familiar you two are with massively open online courses, but this was a revolution in course delivery, essentially providing free or near free courses through public institutions like I think starting with Stanford was the first Coursera course where they were teaching artificial intelligence and machine learning with Andrew Ng as the instructor. So massively open online administration would be an offshoot of that.
So similar to what Cornell was doing when they were doing some of that contact tracing, because I know that some of those courses were taught through those kind of online courses, and I know that there have been other things that have been taught through online courses, and I actually have some friends that have been professors in that system. So I think that I hear what you're saying, even though sometimes I've heard them complain about administration as well. So I do sometimes wonder if the online universities don't have as many administrative problems as some of our academic institutions, even though they're not as big. So maybe their problems aren't as big in the sense that they're micro versus macro managed in that sense. So they might be smaller, but then again, sometimes they're also spread out, because I know one of my friends teaches and she lives all the way in Las Vegas, but some of her courses might be as far away as Denver or New York or even here in this area, because I know that she was teaching in one course at Ferrum, which is in Virginia. So sometimes it spreads our people out in terms of even our faculty members. And I know that some of my teacher friends complain about the tenure system in the more traditional universities, and that can be a nightmare because a lot of them are on contract-to-contract basis, because that whole tenure system, from what I've heard, and I've not been a professor myself, but it seems like a total nightmare. But I just wonder your assessment of both the tenure system and the fact that sometimes the online universities are very spread out.
Well, so this is obviously a nuanced subject, and probably painting things in broad strokes and saying that we should get rid of all the campus administrators and that'll solve everything is obviously not the solution. I don't think that there is a solution or a silver bullet to higher education, but I think tenure is important. I think that there's been a move away from tenure, and that really encroaches on the concept of academic freedom, which is the entire Western scientific and higher education model is based off of this concept that you can hold whatever academic opinion you want, as long as it's supported by science. So I think moving away from tenure is probably the wrong thing, simply because, when my family came to the United States from the Soviet Union, and when you have a regime that teaches a particular Marxist science or a Marxist philosophy, there is a strict party line to what the science is, and if you step outside of that party line, then you are immediately labeled a dissident. This is how the communist system works, and so whereas the Western system is the complete opposite of that, or should be, and that system has been traditionally based off of the concept of academic freedom and tenure. So it sounds like you've been a professor, you understand the rigors of an academic environment and how different professors will jockey with each other for potential deanship or things like this. And so I think that that tenure is a cornerstone of Western academia.
Yeah, that makes sense. Everything. Here in the Carolinas, we had a lot of people that were very much up in arms on both sides when Hannah Jones and Hannah Nicole Jones wanted to get tenure, and now she's going to be having it at Howard and everything. But I was just wondering your thoughts about that whole stir-up and about the whole role of the 1619 project and everything, because we did have a lot of conversation around the tenure, around educational rights and all of that when Nicole Hannah Jones was being involved in the whole concept of whether she was going to come to UNC, whether she should come to UNC, and then eventually the Knight folks created a scholarship position for her at Howard, and they're also bringing Tanisha Coates to that same program, and who knows who else they're recruiting as well. But I was just wondering what your thoughts were when you heard about that flare up.
Yeah, it's interesting. So it sounds like you're referring to a historically black college issue. Those names don't ring a bell to me, unfortunately. I know who those people are. I'm sorry.
Oh, no problem. Like I said, Hannah Nicole Jones was coming here to University of North Carolina, and there was some concept of whether part of the argument was that she was teaching critical race theory and was teaching about that kind of philosophy, and that shouldn't be taught, whereas in my mind, a lot of that is just about us teaching history in the truth of how history is and all of that. So definitely was wondering your thoughts on that as well.
Oh, I see what you're saying. You're trying to get me to take a position on critical race theory. I've read White Fragility, which at least from a theoretical perspective, I think that was one of the leading pieces of literature surrounding critical race theory. Obviously, there's a number of historical facts going back to the Dred Scott decision and as far back into in the early slavery. So I look at that from the perspective of as a white man. I think what precipitated this interview to begin with was a book that I wrote called Mania, and in it I touch on the topic of slavery and the condition of the black man in the United States, and not just African Americans, but also First Nation Americans, and where this whole idea of manifest destiny and white privilege sit in the broader arc of history. And so I'd like to read it to you, if that's okay.
Yes, please.
Okay. And so, by the way, this is titled "Letter to a Child." But, obviously that's anyway, that's what it's called. And it goes something like this. There was a time, child, when we all believed the world was flat, and we thought the heavens revolved around us, and we never ventured far from home in fear of falling from the edge of the earth into the abyss of hell. And the white man lived in Europe, a place across the Atlantic Sea, and he sent ships in search of Atlantis, the ancient continent drowned in the ocean. Then one day, one of these ships came back and proclaimed that it had found America, the new Atlantis over in the west. And the white man found the Indian man living there in harmony with the earth. And the white man thought this very strange and called the Indian man a savage and decided to kill him and round him up on reservations. And he called this his manifest destiny. Then the white man went to Africa and enslaved the black man, bringing him to America, shackled in the hulls of boats to serve him on his newly claimed manifested land. And the black man built white privilege generation upon generation. And when the white man was sufficiently privileged, he freed the black man from his bonds. And the black man was free but not equal. So he fought the white man in the streets, in the courtrooms, and he won his equal rights under the white man's law and under the white man's God. And he used the white man's money and went to the white man's schools and spoke the white man's language and worked in the white man's economy for the white man's companies. Enslaved in the bigger box, one he could never dream to get out of. Except not all the white men like having the black man roaming free in their box. And this caused tensions. And the white man made politically correct the terms by which to call the black man, by which to treat the black man. And he taught this to all the children in the schools, and the black man became an African American, and the Indian became a Native American, and they all lived together under the same laws and under the same God. And they got drunk off the white man's liquor and his synthetic drugs and his narcotics. And the white man sold this American dream to the rest of the world and to its future generations. And where they had been sold another dream, he brought his tanks and his fighter jets and his missiles and his attack drones and claimed manifest destiny over those lands as well in the name of democracy and freedom. And he watched with his all-seeing eye the world is oyster. Like the times of long ago and the times that would come again, Atlantis, oh calamity. The man unleashed upon himself, and just as once the world was round, it became flat again, and we ventured not far from home.
Wow, that was deep and everything. Go ahead.
Well, thank you. So that's kind of my social commentary on the condition of the white man in the arc of history. But I'll tell you that every relationship that I've had with somebody of a different race has been built off of a mutual respect and understanding, and of an understanding of different cultures and and on a personal level to also understand boundaries, right? So we're not the same, we're different, and when we're different, we're the same. So I don't know. I hope that on one side, I understand the plight of the 1619 Project in wanting to have its own identity and its own voice within the broader scope of the American system. But on the other hand, I find that constantly calling somebody out as a racist without knowing the person or without having that basis or foundation for mutual respect, I think leads down a perilous path.
Yep. I hear you. So what actually got you to write the book Mania? I love the title, by the way. That's actually what caught my ears and everything. So I was just wondering what decided to make you want to write this particular book and to get this message out.
Well, thanks so much for that. So it speaks to Mania is a part of manic depressive condition. So that's something that I was diagnosed with after spending some time in solitary confinement, and then fighting that for many years. So I mentioned cancel culture early on in this conversation. I was accused of attempted kidnapping in the second degree 7 years ago, and the fact of the matter is that there was never any attempted kidnapping. It was just a big misunderstanding where I went out of concern. I went to check on two girls who had been left alone in the middle of a park in broad daylight, middle of the day. And so anyway, I got accused of attempted kidnapping, got put in solitary confinement, and left there for 8 weeks while the media spun this story about a mentally ill man, with a history of mental health and attempting to steal a kid from the middle of the park in broad daylight, which is frankly fantastic and fake. But that's the story that the state of Washington likes to tell. And so I fought them in court over this over many years, and I ended up writing this book because I had, frankly, nothing else left to do besides ruminate on my life and figure out what the heck I was going to do with it after going through a complete character assassination. So the book details, it's a book of poetry. It details my life living in a halfway home, dealing with drug and alcohol addiction, and so as you can see, there's parts of it where my writing there's like a budding clarity to it where you can tell I've been sober for a couple of days, and so eventually, so this is my way of telling my story, of getting my name back into society, and showing people what I'm capable of, which is, I like to think, is some pretty good poetry, and then obviously many other things. So.
Yeah, one of the things I was curious about is you mentioned, and actually one of my other guests was going through some similar things, and he's actually been dealing with depression and things of that nature, and that was actually my guest on one of my live streams earlier today. But we were talking about the importance of coming to terms with our mental health and things of that along those lines. But I was just wondering, in your mind, how important was for you to go through those journeys? Because I think that too often we in society don't want to even deal with our mental health and our things that are in that space. I mean, we have a hard enough time going to see our doctors, like our regular physical doctors. And when we started thinking about therapy and mental health, a lot of us started getting a certain way about ourselves. So I was just wondering, as one who's gone through this, how has your growth developed in that regards?
Absolutely. So I'd say that my stability really came with my awakening in sobriety, and understanding that we live really in an upside down world, and mental health is frankly a consequence of that. You know, growing up in high school, I was pretty decent at calculus and physics, and when I watched the Twin Towers come down on September 1st, the simple math of 2 planes and 3 towers collapsing didn't make any sense to me, and so I've been questioning my world ever since that day. And so I think that mental health is just a consequence of the society that we live in, and people that struggle with that, I can just speak from my own experience that we need to take some time apart from the mania of the world that we live in, because sometimes someone that we label crazy in an insane world is actually the sane one.
It's interesting you say that. I remember that when I was in college, I actually wrote a short story, and that was actually the theme of the short story. And I remember I was actually a journalism major, and I want to say it was a creative course within the journalism, but it was basically a short story that had a person talking about what was going on in the outside world, but they were doing it while they were in a mental institution. So they were basically looking at that time, and this was written in the early 80s, at pollution, at some of the things that we were doing in terms of the war and in terms of other things. And they were bringing all these points out together, and then the kind of punchline of the story was, you call me crazy, but y'all are doing all that crazy stuff out there and everything. So that was kind of the punchline of the story, was that I don't know how y'all are calling me crazy when, as I'm reflecting on all of the things that are going on in the world, y'all are the ones that seem to be the ones that are a little bit on the outside. So I love that story, and I might even still have a copy of it floating around somewhere. And if I do, I'll try to dig it up and send it to you, because it sounds like that's very much similar to what your poetry is about and all of that. But definitely a lot of the points deal with drug addiction and the law, and how the law impacted you even while coping with the drug addiction. So I was wondering if you've got a poem that you want to share with us about that aspect within Mania, because I know it's a self-reflection book, and it's definitely got a lot of aspects.
Okay.
One of the points about it deals with addiction.
Okay.
Yeah, and mental health.
Let me find one real quick.
All right. While he's looking, Dean, what has your thoughts been so far about what Mr. George Artem is talking about and some of the things that he's got going on and everything? So what has your thoughts been so far of the conversation while he's looking for the point?
I mean, I'm trying to get my mic straight now. Interesting conversation, man, and big things coming, you know what I mean? So salute to him for making changes, you know what I mean? And it's all about sometimes changing perspective so that you can do different things, you know what I mean?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
You still there, George?
Thanks. Yeah, I'm still here. Thanks for that. I'm reading this back to myself in my head, and I'm kind of, this. So I don't know. This poem kind of in a way, I feel like resonates with a lot of people that could be going through drug addiction, alcohol addiction, and I read back at it and I kind of laugh a little bit as far as how far down the drain my life had gone. And when I finish this, I just want to share how beautiful my life is today and how grateful I am for the people that have helped me along the road. But this one is called Hangover. This one's called Hangover, and it starts with the day after I get out of jail, the most recent time, immensely hungover and coming down from the coke, lying down in my bed, my bare mattress, and a few loose sheets and pillows that I call my bed. I crawl down the stairs of the bare linoleum floor below and look inside the mini fridge underneath the only counter in my apartment, hoping to find something in there that would cure the banging in my head. Sriracha and apple cider vinegar and fat-free ranch. I stick my face under the faucet instead and run the water switching to cold and gulp at the passing stream as most of it goes down my chin and onto the floor. I give up and reach for the vinegar and take a big swig. It doesn't help. I drive, heave, and immediately feel like I need to take a shit. I open the bathroom door and take a seat. My head throbs as I'm pushing out last night's log. It's bigger than I thought it would be, and I nearly pass out there on the toilet with this legendary shit stuck half out of me. I push again and my head throbs and I feel it on its way out, and I let it go and the throbbing stops for an instant, and I do pass out there for a moment sitting with the bathroom door open. So that poem tries to make light of probably one of the many days that I felt like crap waking up, and what I can say today, having been by the grace of God sober for just over 3 years now, is that I never have to deal with that ever anymore, and I'm happy to wake up every morning and to take the day as it is and accept life on life's terms, and just the beauty that is brought into my life every day by the grace of God. So.
Hey, George, one of the things that I was going to bring up that I got from your publishing and everything, but too often I feel that we, even to this day, even in the 21st century, that we spend too much time thinking of drugs and drug addiction as being that problem that exists in the other part of society, meaning the lower class and maybe to some degree the lower middle class, but it doesn't impact the middle class and the rich and things of that nature. And I'm not saying that your dad was or grandfather was all that wealthy, but he did work as an engineer at Boeing, and definitely you had some other family members that were involved in Seattle's software industry and all of that. So it seems, and even you were involved in that. So definitely you were involved in that more affluent society. But outside of the Hollywood community, which of course we all think about that, the Hollywood and the athletic community, oftentimes they don't think about the fact that these crimes and even these drug addictions can happen in the most affluent of neighborhoods. I imagine that there's some people even where I'm living at in some of the affluent neighborhoods that are involved in that aspect of society. And I know that I've got a cousin that was involved in the meth community for a while. So I know it impacts us no matter where our place in society is. But I'd love for you to speak to that as well, because I was just giving a little bit of your family history and a little bit of your own work as you've worked in that Seattle software industry. But, sometimes I still feel that society in general wants it to be like the poor man's problem.
It's something that impacts all of society. And I don't know, the Hollywood world, it's chic to, go to rehab 5 times and, take months of time off of work, in order to do that. So, I was fortunate, growing up in a middle-class home. So it impacts society, I think, on all levels. I think that people with privilege are able to hide it better, and simply, through basic economics have an opportunity to have it not impact their life as much as it does poor communities. So I think drugs are things that impact both rich and poor, and I think obviously poor communities are impacted more heavily than affluent ones are. One of the things that I try to do in my 12-step practice is to bring the message to people that are still suffering, and frankly, I've gotten away from that, but I need to do more of that. I constantly remind myself that I need to go out and go to AA meetings and share my story, because the life that I live today isn't the life that I was living, even 3 years ago. And even with just a few months of sobriety and a belief in a higher power that your life is going to get better, your life really truly does get better, because you're, first of all, you're not spending money on alcohol or drugs. And the way that impacts your pocketbook is pretty significant. So, if there's a way out of poverty, I think this goes hand in hand with financial literacy, is sobriety, and not spending money on the drug or the alcohol, and instead spending those on groceries or rent or what have you, or going out and getting that higher education. I think is so important, and can help a lot of people. So that's one of the things that I need to commit to getting back to is practicing the 12th step and in sharing a message of hope with other people that are still struggling.
No doubt. And one of the things I was curious about it, particularly I've talked to friends of mine who've gone through NA and other kind of programs, is, whether it was the Reagan administration's war on drugs, whether it was supposedly Trump getting tough on the borders, Biden apparently has got some ideas about things around drugs and everything of that nature. But is that a war that we can actually win? We talk about like the long-ranging wars like Vietnam and other wars, but is this a war that can actually be won? And if so, how can it be won? Because it seems like it's been going on forever, and I know that they've even had conversations where, at the end of the day, a lot of the drugs are coming from other countries, and sometimes we don't even do a good job of stopping it at the border. And I'm not just talking about the Mexican border, but even like some of the other ways that are going there. And, of course, this mafia and other people have got their hands involved in it as well. So it just seems like there are so many power players involved that I wonder if it's an even winnable war. I know it's winnable on a personal level, but I'm talking about being winnable as that kind of governmental war on drugs, which has been going on for centuries, and well, maybe not definitely decades, and probably centuries, because I know that there was even conversations around that with prohibition, which is another form of a war on drugs.
Well, to that I'll say that we went from a war on communism to a war on drugs to a war on terrorism to a war on COVID-19. And I think that whenever, having worked in the government for close to a year now, I think that whenever the government declares a war on something, it's just an excuse to spend your tax dollars.
Yep, I can definitely see that, and definitely get. Yeah, go ahead.
Well. So what I mean by that is that in fighting the so-called war on drugs, I think that war can't be won by government or government programs. I think that is a fight that needs to happen on an individual basis, and really should start with the family. And I think that one unannounced war that the government's been engaged in is the war on the nuclear family. We spoke about this a little bit earlier when in talking about the government coming to you with a handout and standing up and accepting responsibility instead of taking that loaf of bread. But I think that when we talk about the quote unquote war on drugs, these are things that need to be discussed within family units, right? It has to come from father to son, from mother to daughter, using stories like mine as a prime example. Hangovers aren't cool. Waking up on a park bench, next to another homeless man or nearly homeless man, you don't know what happened the night before, isn't a productive way to live your life. And it might be cool in the moment, or where I first got introduced to drugs in high school and in middle school. Drinking in middle school and drugs in high school, and I wish that I had a father in the home that could have told me that not to do that. So I think that if the government wants to win a war on drugs, it needs to happen on an individual level, and they got to stop the war on the family.
And how do you think that you would stop the war on the nuclear family? Because, different people have different ideas of even now what a family unit is. And like I said, I've got friends that are in different communities, be that the LGBT community or even some that are in non-traditional families. So do you think that we should just be teaching traditional family values, like the kind of leave it to beaver attitude that used to exist in the 50s, and some people would argue before that? Or do we kind of accept the fact that there are different kinds of family units out there?
Well, whatever floats your boat. I don't know. I don't know what the answer is here. I'm not running for office or anything like that. But from a personal level, I can tell you that, in having an absent father figure, there were people that tried to step in and fill that role. But as a rebelling teenager, that's something that firm hand is something that I really needed. And I ultimately ended up realizing it and getting it through the criminal justice system. But as far as, what do you call it? Same-sex families, I think that obviously they have a right to have children and raise children in the way that they see fit. I don't need to be involved in that, but if that's their choice and they feel like they can raise a child that is a productive member of society that doesn't do drugs, then more power to them.
No, I hear you. And actually, my brother has worked with at-risk youth. He's worked with it for a number of years, and you are so right that a lot of times the reason those kids get involved in gang life or criminal life mentality is because they didn't have those people that were being the compasses of their morals and things of that nature, be that a father or a father figure in their lives. So then they turn to other people like the gangs in order to find that kind of support. And sometimes, of course, they were giving them very negative kind of advice and drawing them into a very negative lifestyle. Because I remember that he's had some folks that he's had tremendous success with in terms of steering them out, but even he would tell you that he's lost some as well, because definitely when you're in that field, you don't always have all 100% successes. So there have definitely been some that have stayed within the criminal justice system, and even some that are no longer here on the planet at all because, their lives have been taken and all of that. So definitely I think that he would agree with you that you've got to have those strong figures in your life in order to have a well-balanced life. And I would definitely not have any problem with that. And if that's what you mean by a strong family union, then yes, I think that we need to have that. But, at the same time, we've also got this tremendous, I had not realized how tremendous it was, like an 80% divorce rate. So maybe we're at that point in society where everybody's kind of wanting that instant gratification, that instant success. They instant everything, whether it's in work or whether it's in relationships, and are not always willing to do what my good friend Dean does, because Dean will tell you that he's been in a long-term relationship, but it's a work, and it's a work that both he and his wife are committed to being involved with. And I know that sometimes people are just too quick to bail without having to do the hard work, but I don't want to put words in Dean's mouth. So, Dean, is that a fair assessment of what you've said on this show several times?
Fair enough.
Well, share with George your philosophy about the family unit and how important your wife has been to you and your life and all of that.
Well, I mean, when you look at, and are you talking about in like relationships as a whole?
Relationships, right? In a whole, right?
Yeah, you got to go in and be willing to listen as well as speak. There are times where you're not always going to be right. There are times where you'll be 100% wrong. But when you're wrong, be able to accept the fact that you made a mistake. I was wrong. You were right. How are we going to fix this? Don't get into the blame game. Don't go back and forth. Hey, sometimes you got to step away from a conversation before it turns into an argument, because when you look back and you look at those arguments, some of them don't make sense. And some of them weren't worth the time that both of you put into it, So sometimes you just got to, she says what she has to say, you say what you have to say. Okay, you realize y'all don't agree, let it go. Let it go. Find something that you both agree on and do that, because it's extra work to argue and fight, and then other things come into play. You got to have that honesty, trust, communication, humor, sense of togetherness, compassion, and compromise. You mix all of those things up and you put it together. And if you are with someone who is of like mind, then you have a beautiful relationship. So that's it, man.
No, I agree with you. Definitely. That's a great advice and great thoughts. What are your thoughts about that, George? And do you have any poems that deal with relationships? So even though you were going through the hard times, I'm sure you also went through relationships. So do you have any poems that deal with relationships as well?
I don't know. I like what you said there, Dean. But you can't give away something that you don't have. And so asking me about nuclear family and how to solve family issues and relationship advice, I'm definitely the wrong person to talk to.
No, I definitely understand that, but I meant maybe just in your own life that you had? Was a poem that you had? Because I know a lot of times people that consider themselves poets will have poems that reflect on various aspects of their life. So I guess what I was asking you was if you had a poem that dealt with just kind of like romance or things of that nature, or if they're all about addiction, or if there's a favorite poem that you have just in general.
No,
like I said,
I hear what you're saying, I do have one. It's a little bit about unrequited love. It's called First Date. It's on page 17. She sits in the front of my Jeep at 2 a.m. with her feet curled up into a tiny ball on her face to me in the driver's seat. Her prescription glasses taped together on both ends and roped around her neck rest just above her breast as she scratches off what remains of half a dozen or so lottery tickets, not one of them a winner. Just her luck, she says as she rubs off the last letter of the crossword puzzle and tosses it into her feet. I'm about to protest regarding the cleanliness of my car, but then I catch something in the side of her mouth that looks like it could be something like a smile and decide to let it slide. We pass the whiskey back and forth as she rattles off about her exes and how they did her wrong, and generally about how everything in her life has gone to shit. I respond with some tales of my own, my stint in jail, my trumped-up charges, my time in solitary, my manic depressive diagnosis, my failed engagement. 2 peas in a pod. She's just as beautiful as I remember her. Perhaps her only redeeming quality at this point in the night, and the small fact that I've had a soft spot for hers ever since I got shipped off to boarding school at the age of 14. So I'm willing to put up with her unloading on me for the moment. This goes on for several hours. Her shit story is longer than mine, much longer. And after a while, the only thing I can think to come back with is that at any given moment, there are tens of tiny cockroaches crawling around my Skid Row apartment. Impressive. Well, let's hang out in an empty parking lot drinking for a few hours. Then why not come over and sleep with me and my insect friends? It is, after all, 5 a.m, and I'm in no position to drive, so take me home and spend the night while you're at it. How romantic. I knew I had it somewhere in me to be able to woo the ladies. Somehow this works, and after a few gas station machine-made lattes, we're headed back to my place at nearly 6 a.m. to inspect the cockroaches. Maybe kill a few for sport. The truth is more that she's doing me the favor of taking my drunk ass home, but for the sake of my ego, I'm more inclined to believe in the effectiveness of the cockroach story. I make a mental note of including it in my bag of general douchebaggery magic, and off we go into the sunrise. I pass out for a moment or two on the way over and forget entirely about the insects and the douche magic. She's speeding and muttering something to herself that sounds like a question. I nod my head in agreement. The birds are chirping by the time we're outside my apartment. The best I can muster is to offer up a hug and a thank you as I stumble out of her car and up the steps to my place. We've left my truck on the opposite side of town, and she promises to come back the next day so we can go back there and get it. That's good enough, I guess.
Wow, powerful poem. Definitely some great thoughts. You know, I've had some friends that have gone through hardships as well, and I've become friends with them. I remember one guy that went to one of the local churches. It's actually a church that was meeting out at the Cultural Arts Center that I work at, and definitely there's another gentleman that I think claims Native American ancestry. But in both cases, they, like you, were able to find love even in the most difficult situations. Now, whether that was love of convenience or whether that was true love, only the course of time will tell. But I was just wondering your thoughts about these kind of, you know, just like there's jailhouse romances, I would argue that there are street romances as well, and I've seen at least 3 or 4 examples of that here in Durham, where I'm at, and I'm sure if I went to other cities, I'd see that also. So do you think that society, as a general rule, should just kind of, as oftentimes we do, discount those romances? Because I know sometimes we'll even see couples out working the streets together, and as somebody that's been through that kind of situation, what would your advice be to the common citizen as to how they should deal with folks that are going through hard times and homelessness and things of that nature. Because, I oftentimes will sit down and actually have conversations with them and try to learn about what they've got going on. Now, they may also hit me up for money, and if I've got it, I may spare it, and they may also hit me up, as one did yesterday, for spare clothes. I haven't figured out anything that I could actually give them, but that doesn't mean that I won't at some point or another. But I was just wondering your thoughts about how general population should deal with folks that went through what you went through back then.
There's a rule in AA that, if you hang out at AA long enough, if you spend at least 3 months sober, you'll find that you're probably better off dating another sober person, and it's generally not advised to start dating until you've been more than a year sober. And my dating rule, my preference has been to try to find some other person that I can share sobriety with, or at least someone who's not abusing drugs or alcohol, somebody that might drink socially here and there. But as far as approaching people that are in the throes of drug and alcohol addiction, my hope would be that other people treat those folks with some compassion, and to allow them a certain amount of grace, if things are acting up, and to definitely not try to date them, because I kind of feel like if you are dating somebody that has a addiction problem, that inevitably you might be tempted to take advantage of them in that problem. So I don't know. I have my own difficulties with relationships, and obviously my past relationships, and so frankly I'm not really one to give advice. But that's the general rule, at least when you come into the halls of AA.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I know sometimes people also get caught up in that codependency kind of attitude as well, because I know some friends of mine that have been involved with folks in relationships, and it seems like, and not always just the drug and alcohol, I've also seen it with people's even mental health, and a lot of times they will wind up being codependent and even finding ways to enable people to do the wrong actions that they are part of. And I was just wondering your thoughts about codependencies and folks that are enablers, because I do know that exists as well, but I just want to know your thoughts about that and how folks should deal with that if they have those traits.
Well, what's so hard for our generation, for my generation at least, is that in order to afford to be able to live anywhere, you're pretty much, unless you're making a lot of money, the average person is kind of is forced into a codependency, because whether that's with same-sex roommates or a same-sex couple, or a I guess you would call it a heteronormative couple, you're forced into a codependency because a lot of folks can't survive independently. They simply don't make, if you're working one job or maybe two jobs, you got to make the rent every month, and living alone, that's not such an easy thing to do. So it's definitely a generation that pools its resources in order to be able to survive in the world. I'm in my 30s, and I make a decent amount of money now, and I'm just now moving into my own place. So I think the economics of life in 2021 are ones that just simply feed codependency as as a need. I don't know whether that resonates with either of you, but that's just been my experience.
No, I definitely understand. And like I said, I'm in my late 50s. Dean's a little bit younger and everything, but definitely not a spring chicken either. But I can definitely resonate with what you're saying and all of that. You know, there's also times that we get caught up in stereotypes, and I was actually going to come back to your, and I know that you're, I guess would be considered second or third generation, but one of my friends is Sasha Starr that does a show with me, and he's of Russian descent, but now lives in Canada. He's like a chess master and all of that, but, you know, he kind of falls into the stereotype of being one of those, you know, you can call it vodka or whiskey drinking Soviets and everything, but definitely we still think of the Cold War and the Soviets in that sense. So I'm just wondering, how much do you think our stereotypes play into our attitude around people? Because I know a lot of people, when they hear Russia, they think of course, the historical Cold War. They think of the cold nature, and they definitely think of hard-drinking, vodka-drinking individuals.
Well, you know, whenever I tell people that I'm Russian, one of the first things they ask me is if I'm a spy, and I immediately tell them that I'm not. And then the next thing they ask me is whether or not I drink vodka and if I can tell them something in Russian. So I think that maybe your friend Sasha and I would have a lot to relate to. And unfortunately, you know, I kind of played most of those things off as a joke, and then I found myself filling that stereotype. You know, oddly enough, drinking to the point of blackout. You know, pretending to be a spy, and various other ridiculous things. So, and by the way, I do play chess as well.
Okay, cool. Well, I'll definitely have to tell him that, and we actually do a show about every day on a daily basis on the Pod TV International Broadcast Media Network, and it's like from 10 to 11. So I'll just send you a link, and maybe you can jump on and meet Mr. Starr, and y'all can share that Russian U.S. background. I'm not sure what your work schedule allows and all of that. Says you are in the United States and have some Russian roots in him. He actually lived in Russia, and he's an older gentleman. He's probably, I know he's older than I am. My guess would be in his 70s, but I may be either shortening his age or increasing it, but my guess would be in the early 70s is where he's at, because I know he's definitely at least a few years older than me, if not a decade or more. But definitely that's where I would guess that his age range is, but y'all would definitely have some commonalities, as you just put it, so that would be a very interesting conversation. You just mentioned that you played being a spy. How does one play at being a spy? I actually knew a true spy here in the United States, and actually I think he had Russian ties as well, and we worked at a grading company, but you can actually look him up, and I want to say Peter, I can't think of Peter's last name, but he was one of those folks that was caught spying and then spent some time in the prison system and then eventually got out, and then I do a variety of jobs. One of them is, of course, my media background, and then I work for a cultural arts center, but I also work for a grading company, a testing company, like end of the year tests, and that's where Mr. Peter sometimes works as well and all of that. So definitely those kind of folks do exist, including real spies. But how did you play a pretend spy?
So this was at Standing Rock. I don't know if you all remember what was going on there. Obviously, the North Dakota Access Pipeline protest.
Right, I remember.
I got arrested out there, and I told the people that arrested me that I was from the National Reconnaissance Office, and I think they believed me.
Wait a minute, there is no National Reconnaissance Office, so you made up an office is what you did.
It's kind of like the Office of Alien Property.
Okay, that doesn't exist either. So you just created these wonderful offices and all of that. That's amazing. I had asked you earlier, and definitely Mania is a great book, and I want people to know more about it. One of the things that I found unusual, but I definitely want you to read some other pieces, but before we get to that, is that you are actually selling part of it in terms of how people can get it in something that is becoming very popular, which is cryptocurrency. So I was just wondering, what made you decide to use the cryptocurrency route in terms of getting the book out there? And it sounds like you're a fan of cryptocurrency, because when I was reading the bio and the stuff that your publicist had sent me, I was like, wait a minute, they're using cryptocurrency. I have not seen a lot of authors doing this, even though I imagine it's going to become more common since everybody can have their own coin, or their own group can have their own coin as well. So definitely it sounds like more and more cryptocurrency things may happen even in the Amazon space and in some of the other spaces. But when I saw that, I was like, this is unusual. I'm going to have to ask George about this. So what made you go that route?
Well, so I've been playing around with cryptocurrency for at least, I want to say, 5 years now. There was a point in time where I had imported a miner and was attempting to do some mining. I also happen to be a Master of Science in Information Systems, so I have a technical background and can kind of understand the concepts behind cryptocurrency and blockchain. Not that you need to have the Master of Science to be able to understand those things, but I became fascinated with that 4, 5, 6 years ago. And started investing in some Bitcoin, and visiting places that were at the time in Seattle accepting Bitcoin as a form of payment, and so I thought that was pretty cool back then, and recently I made the switch into Dogecoin, and have invested in some other alternative cryptocurrencies. But you're right. Everybody and their mom wants to create their own cryptocurrency, and I have my own cryptocurrency project that's called Little Rabbit Coin, and it's a Matrix themed meme coin with the idea that you should follow the white rabbit and see where it leads.
Speaking of following the white rabbit and seeing where it leads, you had also mentioned earlier AI, and I've had some fascinating conversations, including on that news program, about Sophia, which of course is the artificial intelligence that's been walking around and even been on news shows and talk shows and things of that nature. So, and of course, some people are concerned that eventually AI will make us vegetation and lazy, and there'll be no need for human workers. But that's just kind of a mythology in my mind. But I was wondering what your thoughts are about AI, and do you have any concerns about AI kind of like moving us humans out of existence?
Well, I mean, how deep does the rabbit hole go, and how much time do you have? So, I guess we're clearly going down a path of transhumanism, and the last 15 months, we've all been, victim to these lockdowns, and what's been going on is a reprogramming of society, a way to quote unquote build back better and have a quote unquote great reset. So in many ways, this is a spiritual and occult dehumanization of what we thought was normal everyday life, and I feel like particularly with the amount of information and misinformation that's out there today, people have really begun to question their surroundings and their life as they used to understand it. AI is one part of transhumanism. So if you take the Elon Musk's perspective of that we are already under the control of an AI, and that the sort of human AI brain interface is only as fast as our thumbs, and with the idea that should then be sped up somehow into a human hive mind. There's yeah, go Super Mario.
No, that was like our minute marker that tells us how much longer we've got. So we got about roughly 10 minutes. So that's kind of our minute marker. But go ahead with your thoughts.
Oh, okay. Well, let me see. There's actually something. Murakami had written a book called After Dark, which is actually an interesting. It's an interesting story about how a human city awakens in the morning, and as I wrote a brief poem on, it was sort of an homage to that piece, and he compares humans as a human city as sort of a colony of ants that shares a collective intelligence, and so this is called Telemann in E minor.
Okay.
Telemann in E minor through my headphones, battling Mariah and Brandy on the cafe speakers. As I battle the thoughts and words coming in the lines on the blank virtual page, a girl next to me sits eating her bagel lox and watching some movie on her iPhone, oblivious to what's going on next to her and her salmon and cream cheese bliss. As I remember Murakami in After Dark, and how in many pages he would toil over just a few vignettes, passing the time from night till morning, but it's just past 9 a.m., and the city is now awake with lines of human ants filling her streets, slowing at a full stop in the morning rush to get to work or wherever. And Boyz II Men blast out Vivaldi's Concerto in G, the light and playful strings in my ears replaced by a heavy bass line and a cappella. And I wonder if the girl with the locks is going through the same auditory anguish as I am with her movie. Suddenly the locks are gone, and she crumples up the paper that they came in and puts it in her paper coffee cup and closes the lid, puts her movie on pause, gets up, and lifts her backpack from the chair in front of her and turns to walk out the door without further incident. Shortly after, a man takes her place at the table and wipes off the crumbs she left in her haste and sits down in her chair, opening his clamshell and plunging it into the wall next to him, taking the charge from the same outlet that provided the juice from the girl's phone. And it's like nothing ever really happened there, right there in front of me.
Wow.
So,
that's the problem.
Go ahead.
No, I was going to say, you go ahead. So say what you were going to say.
Oh, well, I think I never thought of this poem this way, but I think that kind of illustrates the idea of the fact that through the internet we are in one way or another connected to a human hive mind, and we've unknowingly been going down this path, and it's kind of like a frog in water. When you start to boil it, it's sitting there and it doesn't really know that it's being boiled alive. And I think that we face kind of the same issue with AI, and that it's pervasive. It's all around us. Every time we sit in front of a computer screen to do our work, we are knowingly or unknowingly connecting ourselves to the cyber polygon. So I guess that kind of connects cryptocurrency and artificial intelligence, right?
Yep, totally. It sounds like we've become very much like Borg from the old science fiction television show and all of that. So it sounds like that's where you're going, is that we're almost becoming like the great Borg hive mind and all of that together in some form or fashion or another. One of the things, and I know we're wrapping up and everything, but and this may be a long-winded answer, but it comes back to even some of your Russian roots. I know that the current person in office has talked about the fact that he feels the world should be divided into democracies and autocracies, I believe he said it was. So basically, dictators or democracies. Of course, now you would have some people argue that some of the democracies that we support are also dictatorships or autocracies, because there's some fine line and some gray line between, say, what some of the human rights violations that Saudi Arabia and other places may be doing, and we might want to put them in democracy. And some people might even argue that we could say the same thing about Israel. But do you think that we can divide the world that kind of narrow definitions? Because it sounds like he's almost about to create another version of a Cold War, but instead of it being the U.S. against Russia or the U.S. against China, it's going to be, or the axis against the allies, it's going to be democracy versus autocrats.
So I think Putin ultimately will leave power eventually. I think that if you listen to some of his most recent interviews, he indicates that he wants to leave Russia in a competitive position amongst other world economies and other world governments. I think at the end of the day, all governments are the same in that they keep secrets from people and rely on the innate human quality of trust. And whether it's a one-headed monster like Putin or a two-headed monster like the system of government that we have here in the United States, whether you choose your Coke and Pepsi. I think ultimately what people need to realize is that a lot of times the government isn't out there to support the best interest of its population. We're seeing that with COVID, with lockdowns, with mass vaccinations. Again, white power needs to get with black power and fight the power. So whether it's autocratic governments or governments that are supported by oligarchies or that are on the surface giving us the deception of choice of this Coke and Pepsi model. We need to get out of the left-right autocratic democratic paradigm. We need to get in the up and down paradigm and get together on the community level to see how we can make our own lives better. So it's kind of funny hearing that from somebody who works for government. I probably talk too much.
Yeah, that's all right. You're doing well, and I'm actually liking your viewpoints, and I agree with you. I would actually argue, and I've said that on this show and some of the other shows that I've been part of, the same thing about our institutions, because at the end of the day, in my mind, most religions have the same core principles, but then they get caught up in a certain way about themselves and think that their way is the only way. And in my mind, and I'm not saying that I know and I won't know until the end of the journey, the end of the tale, when I find the final chapter. But in my mind, I'm thinking that the man above, or God, the God force, whatever you want to call it, and everything, is actually letting the people come different ways into heaven's gates. But that's just my mindset, because I find that a lot of the core beliefs are the same, whether you're a Buddhist, a Christian, somebody that believes in Islam or whatever. So I think the core beliefs, of loving of living mankind, respecting your elders, and all of that are very basic throughout all of the world's religions and even the non-religions, meaning like people that don't maybe not even believe at all or have agnostic beliefs. I think at the end of the day, they want some of the core human principles that we all want, which is fairness in life and just some of the core basic principles that are even put out in our Constitution, like the kind of stereotypical life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. But that's just kind of my thoughts. As we're getting out the door, and if you got any thoughts about what I just said, I'd love to hear that. But I would love for you, as we're walking out the door before Dean kicks us out and gives us our the shows and all of that, because there's usually about a 5-minute grace period. So if you've got any quick thoughts that you'd like to share about what I just said, and if you've got a short poem that you want to share on the way out and how folks can reach you, this is your time to do that.
Well, I think my parting thought would be I agree, and don't think B. The easiest way to get a hold of me is to go to my website. It's just georgeardam.com. There you can find my Twitter profile and my LinkedIn page. And if you're looking for a copy of Mania, you can find it on Amazon, Barnes & Noble. And if you do have Dogecoin, you can go up on dogedeals.com with a Z. So it's dogedeals with a Z.com. And I'll get you over, if you buy a copy of Mania there, I'll get you over a signed author's copy. So thank you all so much for your time.
No problem at all. Glad to have you. And do you have a short poem that you want to say on your way out? Maybe a minute or two poem before Dean comes on?
Oh, a short poem on my way out. Yeah, let's do this one since we're getting on the fringe here. This one is A Man on the Moon. And the world turns and the sun goes up and down in the sky, and it sets and we fall into darkness covering the earth, and the stars come out to play, with the moon falling toward it, cosmically conjoined in our ever-quickening cycle. A man on the moon, smaller than a pin. Not a man, not even an ant. Takes a time-lapse photograph of his revolving Mother Earth and brings it home with him on 64 kilobytes and 43 kilohertz and lots of rocket fuel in Kubrick's empty Hollywood set. And I sit in my empty Skid Row halfway home apartment and write on 5 billion kilobytes and 2 million kilohertz and no rocket fuel, an ant one day hoping to take us to the moon and back.
Wow, what a deep poem. Hey, Dean, you want to give us your thoughts about that, as well as the other shows that we've got, and, of course, the various other ways that he can even listen to the replay and all of that. And, by the way, Dean, don't you think that we handled that very masterfully? Notice how he came in and thought that he was going to be in enemy territory, and we just maintained a full hour-and-a-half long conversation. So he thought he was in enemy territory and found out that it wasn't as bad as he thought it was going to be.
No, we leave that enemy territory stuff for somebody else's show, man. It takes too much energy to go and argue. Hey, I don't argue in my house, so I'm not arguing outside of it. But we definitely thank you for spending time with us this evening, man, and taking that time out of your schedule to be with us. So we greatly appreciate that. We definitely do. All right, John. Well, thank you so much. Most welcome, sir. Most welcome. Hey, y'all, it's Straight Talk with Dean and Mark, Monday night, 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Don't forget to catch the replay tomorrow afternoon and Wednesday afternoon on the Skyhawk Radio Network at 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And if you missed those, we do have replays. You can catch us on Radio Public, iHeartRadio, Google Podcasts, Spotify, Spreaker, TuneIn, Stitcher, Podbean, Apple Podcasts, Podchaser, Podcast Addict, Castbox, Podfollow, Deezer, GeoSavin, and right here on Blog Talk Radio, where we are part of the Level Podcast Network. And you can catch other great shows such as The Black Girl's Guide to Surviving Menopause, The Chef Gang Radio Show, Funk from the Front Seat, Funk Music with Zach, Learning Unwrapped, Let's K-12 Better, Marketing with Rush, a.k.a. hashtag Rush Selfie, Mona Shakin and Minority Reports, Mullings, Music and Memories with Mark Lee, The Online Dinner Party with Mark Lee, The Plant a Good Seed Podcast, The Reinvention Road Trip, She's on Call, The Just Podcast, The Mark Lee Show, The Spin It Social Hour, Virginia Interfaith Live, WNC Original Music, and of course, Straight Talk with Dean and Mark. Like I always say, when you walk outside your front door, it's showtime and the world is your stage. just make sure that people are not watching the rehearsal. With that being said, it's Six-Man Dean Geronimo. Have an outstanding week. We see y'all in 7 days.
That's right, 7 days, Dean, and I'm going to go back to listening to the Potted net, where I find some of these great guests as well as some of their publicists. I know that George came through a publicist, and of course jumping on Clubhouse and some of these other social apps so that I can sit there and recruit some guests. And of course, I know you're doing the same up there in your neck of the woods. So we're just trying to find amazing guests and keep these engaging conversations going. So I have no idea who the guest is next week, but I'm sure I'll find somebody intriguing and interesting for us by that time. So just keep your ears open. And if you got some things that you want to let us know about, you can reach out to me at bluesradio@gmail.com. That's bluesradio@gmail.com. So maybe you've got a story that you want to share, or maybe you know somebody that needs to be sharing their stories as well. And of course, if you want to give support to us as well, you can send a Cash App to Mark Lee 1962. Mark Lee 1962 with the $, because that's how Cash App works. So Dean, as we're heading out the door, you want to let folks know how they can reach you, and if you've got any PayPal or Cash App as well, because we got to make sure that we're getting a little bit of some revenue. And I'm also going to say that if anybody's listening and y'all been digging what we've been doing for these years, we are open to having sponsorship. So just keep that in mind as well. So you can reach me or you can reach Dean. And Dean, how can they reach you?
They can reach me at 807media@gmail.com. That's the number's 807media@gmail.com. And I guess you can send Venmo at DEANG13. So Dean G13, you can send it by Venmo. I don't have a Cash App to kick me out. So it is what it is. We hope to see y'all in 7 days, man. Stay out of the heat and have a good one.
That's right. And we'll catch you later. Peace.
Peace.